In my last video, we defined the word persuasion. In this video, our objective is to continue to build a definitional foundation for the study of persuasion. First, we will look at 3 other concepts that are used widely in persuasion research: attitudes, beliefs, and values. Second, we will explore when attitudes affect behaviors and when they do not. Third, we will examine the functions served by attitudes, that is, what they do for us. There are 3 terms that are used often in persuasion: attitudes, beliefs, and values. Let's start with attitude. An attitude is a predisposition to evaluate an object, issue, or person. Attitudes, then, are judgments about whether something or someone is good or bad. We typically talk about having a positive or negative attitude towards the object of that attitude. A positive attitude simply means that our predisposition is to evaluate the object of that attitude positively. A negative attitude means the opposite. We have a predisposition to evaluate the object of the attitude negatively. But what do I mean by attitude object? The object of your attitude is the thing being evaluated. Do you like pizza? Pizza is the object of your attitude towards pizza. Do you disapprove of abortion? Abortion is the object of your attitude towards abortion. Attitudes are central in persuasion. When persuading others, our goal is typically to change other people's attitudes or make it stronger. That is, reinforce it. We assume that a changed attitude will lead to a changed behavior. We assume that a strengthened attitude will reinforce current behavior. We will come back to this assumption later. This brings me to our next term, beliefs. Your beliefs are your judgments about the truth or falsity of something. If you say that you believe in ghosts, your statement only tells me what you think is true in our world, that ghosts live in it, that they exist. It does not tell me what your attitude towards ghosts is, whether you like or dislike ghosts. Let's look at a few more examples to distinguish the concept attitude from the concept beliefs. In our first example, we will see a statement of attitudes, a judgment of the goodness or badness of legalization of marijuana. We also see a statement of belief, the belief that legalization could generate tax revenues. Note that in this example, the belief would seem to support a positive attitude towards legalization of marijuana, yet our hypothetical person is opposed to legalization. Presumably, this person has other beliefs that support a negative attitude towards marijuana legalization. In our second example, we see that the person equates tenure with lifelong job security. That's a belief. We also see that this person feels that the tenure system is a bad thing. That's an attitude. Note that we cannot infer this person's attitude from the belief. An individual could believe that tenure provides lifelong job security and support tenure for that very reason. Perhaps job security is seen as a good thing because it promotes academic freedom or provides teachers with a reason for staying in their low-pay profession. In the third example, we see that the person holds the belief that the president supports gun control. This is a belief because it represents what the person holds to be true about the president. Note once again that we cannot infer the person's attitude from this belief. Down in Texas, such a belief might generally be expected to lead to negative attitudes towards the president. In California, it might generally be expected to support a positive attitude towards the president. This particular person has a negative attitude towards the president. We don't know from the information provided if this is because of gun control issue or other considerations. This brings us to values. A typical definition of values is this: a person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. The things you find important are the things you value. Values are more general and long-lasting than attitudes. They develop over time and cannot be easily changed. The values you have today are probably the values you will have throughout your life. A single value might provide support for a multitude of attitudes. For example, the value that life is sacred may support attitudes towards abortion, against military spending, and against capital punishment. Persuaders often seek to anchor attitudes to values. For example, I learned that you are against bilingual education in schools because you believe people should be self-sufficient. I could try to convince you that your valuation of self-sufficiency means that you should actually support bilingual education. I could argue, for example, that bilingual education helps kids to become self-sufficient. I'm accepting your value, but trying to show you that the attitude your value implies is different than the one you hold. To summarize what we have learned for our first objective, the terms attitudes, beliefs, and values have very specific meanings and should not be used interchangeably. This brings us to our second objective, to explore the question of whether changes in attitude necessarily lead to changes in behavior. This is an interesting, well-studied issue with a long history. We could frame this issue with the question, do attitudes cause our behaviors? Research suggests that this is a poor way to approach the issue. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it is no. We need a better question. Here's a better question. Under what conditions do what kinds of attitudes, held by what kinds of people, predict what kinds of behaviors? Time does not allow us to review all the research relevant to this question, but let me provide you a few examples for each part of the question. With regard to conditions, research suggests that your attitudes are less likely to be related to your behavior when you feel social pressure to behave in a particular way. In such situations, it will be your judgment of what the situation demands that most shapes your behaviors, not your attitude. For example, you might go to a movie you don't want to see because your significant other wants to see it. Our reformulated question also suggests that not all attitudes are equal. Some of our attitudes are based on direct experience with the attitude object. For example, let's suppose that you eat at In-N-Out Burger every day. You love In-N-Out Burger and no one is going to get you to change your mind. This is because your attitude is based on direct experience. Someone else might have a positive attitude towards In-N-Out Burger based only on things that they have heard or perhaps an advertisement they have seen. Their attitude will probably be easier to change. It's weaker. It is not based on any direct experience. The third part of our question suggests that some of us may be more likely than others to use our attitudes as guideposts for making decisions about behavior. There's support for this. Some people look inside to their attitudes as well as their values when deciding how they should act. Other people are more inclined to look outward at the setting they find themselves in and behave in a way that will satisfy the demands of the situation. The last part of our question suggests that attitudes may predict some kinds of behaviors more so than other kinds of behaviors. Much of the research on this point concerns how we go about measuring the behavior we are trying to predict. For example, let us assume that I want to use your attitude towards exercise to predict your exercise-related behaviors. I would be more successful if I ask you about a variety of exercise behaviors, jogging, going to the gym, playing organized sports, biking, etc., than just one. I would also be more likely to show evidence of a strong attitude-behavior correlation if I measure these multiple behaviors over several days, not just on one day. After all, you might engage in all these types of exercise, but just not today because you are sick and decided to stay home and watch videos of fascinating speakers, as well as this one. Our third and final objective for today is to examine the functions of attitudes. What is the purpose of having an attitude? What do attitudes do for us? What are their functions? We say that attitudes are functional because they gratify our perceived needs. For example, a person's negative attitude towards milk helps him to avoid a beverage that makes him sick due to his lactose intolerance. A wealthy person's positive attitude towards Republican candidates and negative attitude towards Democratic candidates helps her to vote for candidates that will enact policies that preserve her wealth. Quite a few classification systems have been proposed for labeling the functions served by our attitudes. These tend to be very similar. For our purposes, I'll describe 4 different functions of attitudes: utilitarian, social adjustive, ego-defensive, and value-expressive. We develop a favorable attitude towards those things in the world that bring satisfaction. We tend to develop unfavorable attitudes towards things that bring us dissatisfaction. Consider the vegan, a person who does not eat meat, fish, or dairy. From the standpoint of our vegan friend, his attitude is utilitarian because it helps him to live longer by reducing his risk of developing heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. Our attitude can also serve a social adjustive function. They can help us to fit in with other people. Have you ever changed your attitude or perhaps described your attitude inaccurately to another person to gain their approval? If so, that is the social adjustive function at work. Let's go back to our vegan friend. Suppose our hypothetical vegan gave up meat, fish, and dairy, not out of health concerns, but because many of his friends are vegans and he wants to be a part of their group. His attitude would be serving a social adjustive function for him by helping him to behave in a way that these other people consider appropriate. Attitudes that are ego-defensive in their function help us to maintain our self-esteem, our overall sense of self-worth. Much of the research on this function has examined prejudice. An example of this function might be the insecure male who diminishes the competence and value of women to elevate his own sense of self-worth. This, of course, is not going to work for him long-term. This example demonstrates that attitudes can be dysfunctional as well. The fourth and final function we will cover today is the value-expressive function of attitudes. These are attitudes that allow us to express our true self. Let's return to our vegan example one final time. Many vegans are so because they believe that eating meat is immoral because it is cruel to animals and contributes to global warming. Becoming a vegan for these people is a matter of living in accordance with their values. The vegan example also illustrates one final point. Attitudes can be multifunctional. You can have an attitude that serves two or more functions. It is possible, for example, that our vegan's attitude towards his lifestyle serves utilitarian, social adjustive, and value-expressive functions. It's an attitude that helps him to live longer, have more friends, and be true to self. Another example. You might like a particular dental product because it helps you to prevent cavities, which is utilitarian, but also helps you to get dates, which is social adjustive. As you go through the next week, think carefully about the attitudes you have and ask yourself, why? The answer to that question will help you to personalize the basic principle that our attitudes are functional.